this is a question for everyone. You most recently brought up the contrast between curvilinear lines that are graceful, that aren't commonly noticed in the medical establishment. I'm curious what the other panelists have noticed as well in terms of how curvilinear lines versus rectilinear spaces may, if you've noticed if there's any kind of difference in terms of playing a role as facilitating mindfulness or not, or what your take is on that contrast.
Well, I think it really depends. But certainly one strategy that many contemplative spaces use is to juxtapose the kind of constructed environment with the natural. And this word nature is dangerous, of course, but so the notion that when we look at vegetation in the garden, for instance, or the comparison between the hospital and the garden, the hospital has a certain geometry which is that way because of a lot of reasons, tables and chairs are square and, things like that. It's hard to put a door in a round room. But at the same time, that kind of juxtaposition between an orthogonal and a curvilinear geometry is a very powerful thing. And when we think about the kind of relationship of, person to nature, that counterpoint between them is important. I think the other thing is the role of light and shade and shadow. And so I think in all our talks you've seen examples of that where, like in Tadeo Ando's work, he usually uses very strong orthogonal forms, or sometimes subtle curves, which then track the sun, and the impact of those shadows themselves introduce another kind of geometry. So it's that kind of interplay.
The answer may be not either or, but both and, or as Venturi talks about, not black and white, but gray. The condition of gravity is a vertical one, and that we walk on horizontal surfaces, but the sun appears to move in the sky like that. And one architect, Corbusier, first when I showed my teaching, says he was from Switzerland, and it's the world of the Germanic nations to the north and mountains, as well as the Latin culture of the Mediterranean. So the diagram is both and maybe not exclusively either or. That's why day and night, but morning and evening, which are gerunds. So in architecture tries, I think, to actually have a dialogue between these conditions of the world again and again as we turn 2 hours past.
Yeah, a couple of things. What I said about curvilinear lines is one of the more controversial areas, but to pick up on what Phoebe said, and I should have pointed this out in the slide, in that Byrne Garden itself, you will see that the pavilions are very rectilinear and they're played off against the curvilinear geometry, just as, in a Japanese, in Abbott's room, often the shoji screens slide back, but are very rectilinear and they look out into a very organic landscape. Also, I should say that architects are beginning to incorporate curved spaces within buildings. Now, I could have given a lecture on our new cancer center here, the McCurry Cancer Center, but if you'll note, the hallways there bow, they bend at a considerable expense. That was almost value engineered out of the building. But the reason for that, there are studies that show long views in one-point perspective down these hallways that are cluttered are very, very depressing to people. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. So by bending those walls a bit, it does have some positive psychic response. Maybe, yeah, why don't we just use this?
I've just returned about 2 weeks ago from a trip to Malta, where I went to see the Halsaflini hypogeum, which is one of the oldest human-constructed spaces that we have, although it's built into the ground as opposed to above the ground. But what's very unusual in particular about that space, although it's so old that archaeologically there are a lot of arguments about what it is that it has extremely unusual acoustic properties. And there are some theories that the acoustic properties of that architecture were intentionally created with contemplative states of mind in mind. So, Professor Crisman, you said a little bit about the acoustic or oral qualities of architecture, but you tended to talk about, well, whether it was the sound of water or sound dampening, but then there are other examples in European cathedrals where there are particular sweet spots clearly meant to emphasize or amplify the voice of the speaker. And I just wondered if you had any more observations about different architectural structures or the relationship between the acoustic element of architectural structures and contemplation directly.
Well, I think certainly for designers, the importance of acoustics is right up there with, you know, light and air and a lot of other issues. So the fact that we're using this microphone in this room, actually this room could have been designed more effectively so that wouldn't be necessary. And so there are acousticians that architects work with. If you're designing a concert hall, actually the entire shape of that space itself is dependent on the acoustic properties that one is seeking, whether it's chamber music or a symphony or an opera. And so certainly, you know, 2,000 years ago, people were thinking about that as well. They didn't have the same ability to calculate and model that space in advance of construction. But yeah, I mean, they were definitely doing it. And we think about a lot of the most powerful, I'm trying to think of examples, there are so many, but a lot of the most powerful spaces that are, I'm thinking, I guess, more religious spaces at this point, but often spaces like you mentioned, the Gothic Cathedral. There's a very specific program for sound in that space, and whether you use hard surfaces to create a kind of echoing environment or something where you actually want to quiet the sound and dampen it. So yeah, I think you're right. I don't know, when I think about the one center I showed, the Buddhist center in New Mexico, and it was following or translating a kind of traditional Buddhist temple form, even the use of the tatami mats and a kind of soft material which would then, you know, quiet and kind of dampen that sense in the space is really important. You might think of some good examples.
One small perspective is that there's an understanding that long before architecture, people danced and they sang. And they made space by the break of sound, their voices together with animal sounds. And I've seen this in ancient Indian research. But they danced, and there's a book called When Columns Danced, that people were dressed up in white togas or in lines. It's like square dances and all these other things. We make space among ourselves without architecture and did it. And the Parthenon is very much suggesting that there was once a deep forest there with lots of columns, but people also went from the marketplace up to it twice a year to celebrate harvest, and they made spaces first with their bodies as they circled around and looked out to the Aegean. So it exists out in the world before. It doesn't begin with architecture. It begins human sounds and our capacity to form circles and squares and things like that.
Just a quick reply. I think sound is one of the really unexplored areas in medical facilities. Now we have music and music therapy programs and spaces that would be designed to complement a piano or a harp or whatever it is. But let me distinguish between sound and noise. Noise is the #1 stressor in a medical facility. And again, I'll take the example of our cancer center. It is one of the quietest buildings you will ever encounter, and so there are great links have been taken to dampen sound within that building. So there are different types of sound, obviously, but I just want to point out that noise is a problem, and it's the #1 stressor.
So one more question. Yeah, it's the second area here.
I just have a practical question. I'm very happy that the Cancer Center did go ahead and do the curved corridor, but is anything being done to document the value of that so that in future building that doesn't become a problem? Because I think it's so much more, I work in a round building, and it's so much more user-friendly to me. It feels organic, it feels better, not looking
That's a very important point. The answer is yes, that there will be what we call a post-occupancy evaluation, we call it POSE, of that building. And certainly the effects of the curved walls will be part of that. I think what we need is a series of case studies of